Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Little Steps Facebook Live. We are here at home. We're doing a virtual one. We're here at home during a T8 that's now moved down to a T9 or T3, so that's good. So the typhoon is moving away. Just a few friendly reminders before we get started. We are live twice a month. If you wish to be reminded of our live sessions directly to your phone, check our events calendar each week and click the ones that you're interested in. Don't forget to sign up for our weekly newsletters across major cities in Asia, from Hong Kong to Singapore to Kuala Lumpur and beyond. The link is in the description. Now we are live, so feel free to ask us any questions, give us comments, and interact with us right here. We will be answering your questions during the live interview and after. So let's get started with our topic. Now, whether it's during the school holidays or preventing your toddlers from having a meltdown, sometimes it is okay to relax about screen time. The tricky part is when an hour-long video leads to another, and then another. Find themselves giving more and more screen time to their children, becoming worried whether their children are becoming digital addicts. And some parents are even embarrassed about how much screen time their kids are getting. Today, we talk to an expert in the field. Little Steps is very happy to welcome Leith Stewart. She is the founder of Young Folk Therapy, and she's a highly experienced and well-respected expert in the field of occupational therapy. She was trained in Australia. She has been practicing occupational therapy for over 18 years and has worked in a variety of roles within the field, including 11 years here in Hong Kong, working with schools and kindergartens. Welcome, Leith. How are you?
Hi, Nikki. Thank you for having me.
Safe at home?
Yes, I am. I was telling you before, I had it all planned to be in my beautiful office for today, and then
I know.
T9 wrecked that, so I've had to scamper all my things together in my bedroom for my makeshift studio. So I hope I'm coming across nice and clear.
Well improvised. I hopefully will see your studio another day or your office another day.
Yes.
So just tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get started with our topic.
Okay, so I've been in Hong Kong for 12 years now. I have a 8-year-old daughter. I have been an occupational therapist for almost 19 years now. I've been working in Hong Kong as an OT, mostly as a sole practitioner for the last 11 years. And about 12 months ago, I opened Young Folk Therapy. So we're a clinic based in Mong Kok, and we have occupational therapists, speech therapists, and a counsellor. And we work with children in the local school system, in the international school system, all ages, mostly primary school age kids though.
Okay, awesome. So for those who are not familiar with occupational therapy, can you just tell us what it is exactly?
Yeah, great question. And you know what? I've been doing this job for 18 years and I still don't think I've got a really great answer to the question. So my definition of an occupational therapist is that we use our expertise and our knowledge base to help make life more joyful and easier for our clients, our families, and our patients. So we do that by looking at their functional skills and their behaviours and looking at ways we can use those things to help them achieve their goals, school goals, or parent goals. So, for example, I work with children in schools, and so one of the goals in schools might be for the children to improve their gross motor skills. So I might work with them to get their core stronger or their balance stronger. Other OTs, I might work in a hospital and they might work in a rehab setting, and so they might want to try and get people discharged home from hospitals in a safe way so they can dress themselves and they can have a shower. So OTs generally work in a range of different professions, and I think that's why we have such a hard time defining our role, because people have an idea of what they do based on their experiences with OTs. So in Hong Kong, I work with a range of children, so they might have a actual diagnosis of autism, Downs, or speech and language delay, or they might just be children who are traditionally in the main school system that need some support with their handwriting or attention and concentration. So we work in loads of different areas with loads of different clients and families.
So what I'm gathering that your expertise goes in, or this field, occupational therapy, goes into a lot of fields, but it focuses more on activities rather than therapy of the one we think of, sitting and talking. It's more focusing on doing things rather than.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point. So occupation is actually the things that we do in our everyday life, and that's where the profession of occupational therapy comes from. The silly thing is, no one knows that occupation is play, or occupation is going to school, or occupation is painting, except for OTs. We're literally the only ones that know that. So, but we're definitely an activity-based profession, and we use activities that are meaningful for our clients and our patients to try and get those goals and help progress.
Fantastic. Perfect to talk about this topic today then. So let's introduce it. For those who have just joined us, I'm here today with Leith Stewart, the founder of Young Folk Therapy. We're talking about minimizing screen time, and we're splitting today's chat up into two areas of focus. We're focusing on the impact of too much screen time, and then the second area of focus is how to implement rules and guidelines. So we're going to go right ahead and get started with the impact of too much screen time. So first question, what is the correct age to introduce screen time?
I think the absolute later, the better. So the Hong Kong guidelines state that children under 2 should have no screen time at all. And I think that's fairly consistent among most of the countries. The other Hong Kong guidelines are children between 2 and 5. So really before that formalised schooling should have 1 hour of sedentary screen time a day. So, yeah, sorry, Nikki.
Why is that? Why under 2? Why is the cut off? And why is that kind of across the board as well? Why is it dangerous for anybody under 2 or not healthy?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different reasons. And I think it basically comes down to they don't need screens under 2 years old. Their little brains are developing at such a huge, huge rate that everything in their world is new and novel and interesting to them. They love sound. They love looking at their hands clapping together. They love, playing hide and seek back and forth. So everything about their life is new and novel, and every single day of their lives, they're experiencing and learning new things about themselves. So we don't need to be bringing in extra stimulation during the time when they're so young.
Understood. So then the correct age would be to introduce screen time, as you said, as late as possible. But if for those who want to introduce perhaps screen time as early as possible, what would be an advisable age?
So I also think when the kids are young, so let's talk about, say, the 3 to 5 year olds, that's sort of kindergarten, preschool age. I think you need to define what screen time is and before you introduce it. So for example, if you're putting some like the Wiggles or some music on the TV that they can watch from a distance, I kind of think that that's okay. We're showing them age-appropriate screen time use. Their faces aren't up into a screen. And we also know that their attention span's not that great. So we know they don't actually sit there and watch TV from a distance from a young age. I think it's really problematic when little children are given tiny little iPhones to watch and iPads to watch. I think it's really, really bad for their eyesight, their brain development, that's oversensory stimulation, and even their little posture. Like this is a time when we want them to be walking around and stretching their muscles. We don't want them in one fixed posture with their neck down, holding a screen, swiping. So I think in terms of screen time, I think you really need to delay giving your child a handheld device for absolutely as long as possible. But I think TVs and watching something on a TV that has to create a bit more of a sustained engagement, or even if it's just them singing and watching someone play songs and do songs, that's a bit more of an active screen watching, is okay. And I think, you know what, I will preface this with, you know, being in Hong Kong and being expats, we do tend to have to do some long haul travel when we go home to see our families. And I think on those times when you've got a big plane trip, or you've got lots of traveling to and from the airport, etc., a little bit of screen time on a handheld device before 5 years is okay, as long as there's some guidelines and boundaries on that.
Yeah. So you would advise for parents to check what screen time they think is the correct screen time. So you would advise a more active type of screen time with sing and dance, and then between 3 and 5 is okay, but minimizing it as much as possible unless it's on the plane or something special.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I think. Yeah.
And bringing on to my next question, how are screens impacting children's play and therefore their emotional regulation and their understanding of the world? If we're giving them screens, especially here in Hong Kong, houses are small. We don't have as much space, especially for the expats who are coming from Europe or Australia. We're used to our gardens, we're used to our parks, bigger spaces. And now, especially with the pandemic, we're confined to our houses. So of course I understand that parents would just want to get over it and give them a screen, but perhaps if they understand how it's impacting their children's play. So can you explain how it is impacting them?
Yeah, I think it is really important to break down the different age groups as well, because you know, in different age groups, we're developing in different ways. Our children's brains are developing in different ways. Their understanding, their emotional regulation, their understanding of the world is different, and it's changing. So I do kind of think it's important to have some sort of ideas and boundaries at each step of the developmental sequence or their ages. So, you know, for example, with young little kids, let's talk about maybe sort of 6 and under, when school and their home life is still very, very predominantly play-based. There's so many benefits of play, and example, so play helps with our language development. It helps with turn taking. It helps children understand that the world that they're in when they do role modeling and pretend play. It helps build their imagination. And so all of these skills cannot be replicated on a screen. You know, we're also at a time when the kids are young, they're developing their fine motor skills, which is how they use their hands to do things. They're building, they're problem solving. They want to make a big Lego fort, but they're not quite sure how to get things together. So then they're developing their visual spatial skills. Now, these are all such important academic skills. These are all the skills kids need to be able to read and to write and sit in the classroom and do their maths. So they have to be developed at a young age, and it has to be developed through real life experiences. They also have to learn how to turn take, and it's my turn now, or it's your turn, or you're playing with that and I really want that. So how do I get around negotiating playing with that? And so they're just those real life experiences you can't get into a screen. And when children play with other children, or when children play with their parents or their caregivers, what they're also doing is they're bonding and they're forming a relationship, and they're getting a beautiful oxytocin hit through their eye contact, which is our happy hormone. And so all of these really important emotional regulation skills is what they're getting through play. And so I think that's why it's just so important that kids have this time. Now, as kids are getting older into that primary school year age as well, there's only so much time in a day. And in that day, we want our kids to sleep. We want them to eat and have good nutrition. We want them to develop relationships. They've got to do online schooling. They've got to do some physical activity, and they've got to work on their executive functioning skills like memory and things like this. So we've got to make sure that they've got enough time to do all those really important basic things in their day without just relying on screens. And if we're adding in all this screen time, something has to give, whether it's a physical activity, whether it's connecting emotionally or with their friends in other ways, whether it's sleep, which is a massive one as kids are getting older into their teenage years. And all of these are going to have an impact on the way that they develop, the way that they interact when they are in real life situations with their friends, families, and teachers, and on the way that they think about themselves as well. And so I think we have to be really cognizant and understanding that while screens are a big part of our lives now, we have to be really, really careful that we have to balance these with the other really important things that are non-screen related, that we need our children to be able to do to grow and develop.
Yeah, no, of course. It is very difficult for parents to introduce. Do you think how, because kids always compare themselves with other kids, and then, as you said, teenagers, lack of sleep. I imagine that's a big one where kids are, whether it's an iPad or iPhone or anything, that they're just not getting their sleep and probably staying up late. How do you introduce such? Do you talk to your child? Do you tell them this is what? Do you explain what it does to their brain or what it does to their physical abilities, or do you go on a more parental note and say these are the rules? How would you do it?
Yeah, so I think what you have to think about as a parent, when you're giving your child a device that has absolutely unfiltered access to the internet, if you think they're mature enough to have that access, then they have to be mature enough to have the conversation about what screens are doing to your body and to your mind and things like that. Now, if you're not ready to have that conversation with your children, they're not ready to have a screen.
Okay, that's a very good point. I like that very much. So if you're introducing, because as you said before, the regulation for Hong Kong and for most countries around the world, there should be no screen time for kids before the age of 2. So people will be introducing screen time at the age of 3 for some. How do you explain that to a child? Are you then saying perhaps it's not best to introduce it at all at that age? Because it would be quite hard to explain to a 3-year-old, you can only have this for a little while. Or how do you explain the impacts?
I think too, like that probably goes on to a little bit more of what we want to talk about in the next section. Well, we can address that now. I really think that all parents need to have rules and guidelines in their family about screen time. And this has to probably be discussed first between the parents or the primary caregivers, and then bring the children into the discussion based on how old they are. Okay, when children are young, when they're under 5 or so, I don't think there's a discussion. It's either yes or no.
Yeah.
You can have screens at this time, you can't have screens. You can watch 2 episodes of Peppa Pig and then it's going off, and then we're doing something else. You don't need to explain. Just like as parents, we don't need to really explain, why they need to eat their broccoli or why they can't run across the street without shoes on or things. Like there are just some inherent rules as parents that I think that kids just have to follow and abide by. As they're getting older, I absolutely think you need to have those discussions about what screen time is doing to them and the impact on their self and their behavior. Like I have a lot of kids. I work with loads and loads of kids, and I've worked with such great parents too. And so many of them come and say, I know I'm not allowed too much screen time because it makes me not be able to concentrate. And I think that's brilliant, because absolutely let's tell them why. Let's not just be like these horrible parents that are putting down a rule because we think it's the right thing to do. Let's explain to them why. And so in our house, we have rules and then we have guidelines around our screen time use. So rules are just absolutely non-negotiable. They're things that are set in stone, and it doesn't even matter how much whinging and crying and begging and negotiation, those rules don't change. And then we have like our boundaries that, okay, maybe we can change this if it's on holidays, or because you've done your homework, you can get an extra bit of Nintendo Switch time. So those can be a little bit more flexible. But I think the big problem happens is when parents confuse rules and boundaries, and then it turns out to be nothing. And there's this constant battle and there's this constant fight, because absolutely kids want to push boundaries. They want to do the things that are interesting for them and exciting for them. Just like we do, like we want to go, and when we have got something really hard to do at work or a big proposal to do, I'd much rather like look at beautiful houses on Instagram or scroll through new dresses. And so we have to put these rules and boundaries on ourselves. But kids can't do that the way that adults do. So we need to do that for them, even up until they're teenagers.
Can you explain for the parents, especially when they want to explain to their older kids, what does screen time do to a child's brain? How does it affect it? How can they explain that to their kids when they're at the right age, of course?
Okay, so let's maybe talk about when you want to start giving your child their own handheld device and you're allowing them to play or have a little bit more free access to social media, WhatsApping their friends, Snapchatting their friends, watching gamers, chatting on Fortnite and all the rest of it. So number one, I think parents have to really look to see if their children are mature enough to handle all of those sort of things as well. And I think you have to watch your children's behavior about what happens when you take these devices away, because what the research is telling us, what my parents who I work with are telling us, is that they're having all sorts of behavioral problems and meltdowns and tantrums when these devices are being taken away, which shows that there is some addictive behavior there. So what we do know as well, that gamers or games and social media and WhatsApp is very, very addictive, because every time we're in Fortnite and we're killing someone, or we get a ping, or we get a like on TikTok, we get this, like, we want a hit of dopamine. We're trying to get the hit. We're trying to find this nice. It's pushing us to do more and more. We want more likes. We get that hit. We get the serotonin release, and we feel happy, and we feel like really excited, and it kind of like gives us this nice release. And then they want to do it again, and they want to do it again, and they want to do it again. And so what we're finding is these are our addictive behaviors, because what they need is more and more and more hits of this dopamine and this serotonin to feel normal or to feel happy. And that's when we're starting to get these issues with depression and anxiety when these things are taken away. And what's really worrying about all of these behaviours is that we also know that addictive behaviours creates other addictive behaviours. And our teenage brains are just ripe for learning and creating all these connections. And it's just one of the biggest times for our brains to develop. They're developing all these connections. They're making really strong connections in our brain. We used to think when kids were young, that was the biggest time of development. Now we know as children are in going through puberty, their development is really soaring, and they're getting these stronger connections that they need to move into adulthood and to move into making their own decisions as adults. Now, we don't want that time of amazing learning and amazing experience to just be wound up all the time in this constant dopamine, serotonin loop where they're just constantly wanting the next thing. So I think we need to tell our children that, it's not good for your brain to be always being stimulated, and it's not good for your brain to constantly be being excited and then being down and then being excited. We need you to be able to have a calm state. We need you to be able to be really hyper focused on your schoolwork, not focus on all these things that are giving us this constant stimulation. We also know that children, especially in that teenage year, they're usually not just using one device at once. Quite often, they're on their computers, they've got 3 tabs open, they've got their phone next to them and their iPad, and they're doing 3 or 4 things at once. They're WhatsApping their friends and they're playing their game. And that's really impacting on their ability to stay focused and expand their attention. And that's when we're seeing some of these difficulties in schools.
No, that's a great answer. We've got questions coming in from our audience, so I that's why my eyes were flickering a little bit. No, that's a great answer to that question. And after I give you the questions from our audience, we'll focus on what it's actually doing to the physical issues as well, not just the mental issues. But so we've got a question from Matt Lee. Thank you. He asked, I think it's also the parents modeling screen time behaviors as well. So I think it's more of a comment where he's saying that it's just as important. And then we also have a question from Rebecca Boss saying, such a fantastic discussion. Do you think it is suitable to use screen time as a reward for good behavior?
Oh, such a great question. I personally think it is okay, but also depending on what behavior you're trying to create in your child, or what the behavior is in the child that needs fixing or changing. And also, is it a reward, or do they just get that anyway? We know so many kids just have unfettered use to their screens. So by giving them additional screen time, that's not really a massive reward, because they're already getting the reward of the screen time. Okay. So for example, like online learning right now, I think it's a really great example. Online learning is tough at the moment. It's tough for the teachers. It's tough for the parents. It's tough for the kids.
Yeah.
So, and they're spending a lot of time on their screens. So for one example, I think, like if your child is going from 8:30 to 2 or 3:30 all day on their screens, but they're doing their schoolwork and they're not getting any of the passive screen time that they want, I think that maybe 20 or 30 minutes at the end of that school day, I think that's okay. Because I think also what you have to do as parents is think about, what do I do to reward myself at the end of the workday? So at the end of the workday, when I'm tired, I want to do something that's maybe a bit more passive or that's enjoyable to me. And that might be watching Netflix, or it might be WhatsApping some friends from home, or it might be, like I said, randomly scrolling through some websites. And so I think you have to think about what's the context of the reward. If your child is constantly having really inappropriate behavior and yelling at you and screaming at you for taking screens off them during times when it's not appropriate for them to have screens, such as at the dinner table or when they should be doing their online learning, then no, you don't give screens as a reward in that instance. So I think it really depends on what behavior are you really trying to target? And also you've got to define the behavior. Good behavior, like what does that mean to a child? What does that mean to anyone? A behavior that could be targeted with screens is, in the morning, I need you to get up, get dressed, have a shower, put your towel away, make your bed and set yourself up. If you do that in the morning, at the end of the school day, you can have 30 minutes on Minecraft or whatever you want. So I think setting up that behavior and really defining that behavior I think it's okay to be contingent on screens.
Yeah, great answer. I hope that's answered your question, Rebecca. We've got one more question from Judd Boaz. He said, "Hi, really enjoying the discussion. My kids are just entering year 4 at primary school, and all their classmates have iPads and phones and gadgets. How do you deal with perhaps your children being surrounded by screens at a friend's house and even at school?" They're asking all my questions for the next bit.
I know,
That's
I love it.
fun.
Yeah, do you know what? I find this really difficult. My daughter is 8 years old and is also in year 4, and we have fairly, as you could probably imagine, fairly strict screen time rules in our house and are non-negotiable. So some of the things that at school, I think it's really difficult. Like at my children's school, they're not allowed to have their handheld devices at all during the school day, so we don't have a problem with that. It's only the screen time in class, so that's fine. She's absolutely never allowed to take her device anywhere. She's never allowed to take her device over to someone's house, or very rarely. Like sometimes if it's on if they want to sleep over and she's got a game on her Nintendo Switch that she's desperate for her friend to play. And I think the way you manage that, I think there's a couple of ways. I think you manage when they go to other people's houses, you have to let go, because you can't be the boss and have the control on other people's houses and rules. So if you're going to someone's house, if you're worried about their screen use, I've absolutely had discussions with parents and said things like, look, we don't let Isla go onto YouTube. We don't, so is that okay if, they can play Switch or they can watch TV, but we don't like her on YouTube or TikTok. It's just non-negotiable for us. And I think we have to be, as parents, we're our children's biggest advocates, and we have to advocate for those sort of things. I think that when children come to your house, we've had children come to our house and bring their devices, and I just quite often won't let them play. I'll be like, no, you've got to put it away. You can do this. And then, if it's a big, long play date, you can have screen time between 1 or 2, as long as it's on the TV or you're playing Just Dance on the Nintendo Switch, so it's a bit more interactive during play dates. I don't let them sit there and do this with each other, because I just kind of think they've got enough time to do that other ways. I think also another big issue with other parents' screen time behaviours and rules and guidelines for their families is when you go out to eat and go to restaurants with other families. When we were able to do that, when we were able to go out in big groups and have restaurants with families.
Someday, soon.
Yeah. And I think that's really, really difficult. And I think you need to set your child up beforehand so there's no problems and then there's no issues. So, for example, one of the rules in our house is that there's never allowed to have a screen time during meal times. So that's even if we go out, even if we go out with other families and their kids have got their screen time, my daughter's still not allowed to use our phone. And so I will say to her beforehand, just so you know, you're not getting my phone when we're out. Bring a book, bring something to draw. Now that doesn't stop her from sitting there looking at the other kids when they're on their screens. But also, I just say different families, different rules.
Different rules.
I'm okay with that. Like, I'm really just concerned about the way my daughter is interacting with screens, and I can't control the other families, the way that they want their children to interact with screens. And so, and also you don't kind of know what's going on during the day as well. Their kids might have had a completely screen-free day, or one of them might be feeling unwell and has to come out for dinner, and it's a bit of a bargaining tool. So, I don't think that, just because that's your idea, you can put it on to other families. But I think, again, if you just have really clear guidelines and rules about screen time on play dates, on holidays is another big one. I think that can be tricky if you holiday with other people and you have different screen times. But I kind of think a really great rule of thumb is just be really concise with your rules and expectations. Set your child up beforehand so there's not a big fight. And, again, just use the different families, different rules. And I think that can work with a huge amount of situations.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for all those questions. Keep them coming. We are here during the live interview. So any questions, we can get back to you right during the interview and also after. I'm just going to ask the last question of this area of focus because we're already 45 minutes in, which is great. Love these So we're going to ask our last question. What I wanted to ask with regards of too much of impact of too much screen time, what are the physical issues of too much screen time?
Okay, so this is, another great question. So as occupational therapists, we are very, very concerned with children's gross motor skills, the way they use their hands, fine motor skills, the way they use their hands, and gross skills. So that's why they use their bodies and their muscles to run and skip and hop and jump and sit in class and carry their school bags and walk up a hill. And over the last definitely 8 years or so, there has been a significant decrease in children's fine motor skills, gross motor skills. Their strength has gone down, their endurance has gone down, they're faster to fatigue, their core muscles, so their tummy muscles have decreased. And what's so important about kids being able to have strong tummy muscles is they've got to sit up in class all day, they've got to support their heads, they've got to be looking around. In Hong Kong, our schools are usually very vertical. They've got to walk up and down the school all day. And what we're finding, and these kids are absolutely exhausted. One of the number one referral issues I get from teachers is he can't sit up in class. He's constantly slumping down. He's lying all over the other kids. And so this has a massive impact. And I really believe it's got to do with less physical activity and more screen times in a fixed position. So when kids are on screens, you see it all the time. You see it at the NTR, you see that when they're at schools on the school bus, they're sitting on their devices and they're not moving. They're in these contracted positions. Their hamstrings are getting tighter because they're sitting down all the time. They can't stretch out their legs. Their neck and their shoulders are getting sore. Their eyesight is deteriorating. There's been an increase in nearsightedness. So they're fine with close up. Long distance is blurry. Kids need to see long distance to see around the classroom and to see the boards at school. We need really good smooth tracking to be able to read and to do maths and to do all of those things. And there has absolutely been a significant decrease in all of these areas over the last 8 years that I think more, and like since the iPad and the iPhone. And I think that especially in a place like Hong Kong where we don't have great access to outdoor space and backyard, we need to be able to minimize those static postures as much as we can. And I think that's why television is a better option a lot of the times, because they're sitting far back. And have you ever seen a child sit and watch TV like this for half an hour? It doesn't happen. They're moving around, they're putting their legs up, they're finding other things to do. So they're constantly moving their bodies around. And so, with that constant movement, there's that little bit of incidental exercise as well. And I think, I'm really lucky. Some of the schools that I work in where the teachers are really open to having different things in the classroom. So we have standing desks and we have therapy balls and and the teachers constantly are rotating around the kids' sitting postures because they know they're doing too much sitting with and on their screen times. So a lot of our teachers are trying to counteract this by getting them moving around.
Great. That's quite shocking that there is that much, and especially as you've been studying for that you've noticed in the last 8 years that it's really been prominent. It's quite shocking. Wow. We have one more question come in.
Okay.
It says here, gaming, ? There are a lot of positives with gaming in terms of problem solving, etc. But should the limits be treated differently compared to passive screen time, which we just discussed with the television? Also, do you lump it into time limit, like X minutes per day across all devices or per type? Good question.
Yeah, do you know what? I think gaming is like a massive another discussion as well.
I agree. That is, gaming is it is a different thing. Even though we do have games, of course, lots of people are hooked on their games on their phones and on their iPads, and children do often play games on their phones and iPads.
Yeah. And I think too, this is a really interesting question for me. I work with a lot of children who are autistic. Now, children who are autistic often have a very hard time with social communication. And when they can play games online with their friends, it does create a social connection for them that they might not otherwise get, because social communication is so hard for them. And because
it disconnects perfectly.
And so because they connect in different ways, and because quite often they can be very hyper focused on a particular game or a particular do something, they become very good at it, and so they can become the experts. So other kids can come to them and ask them these questions, and it's helping them build a social world and a social connection that they can struggle with in face-to-face and in real time. So I do think that can be a positive of some of these games. I think, number one, there has to be limits on it, and it absolutely does. I think gaming limits needs to be under kind of like this. I think gaming it can be quite passive, and like in the way that someone is helping them do something and the game is still controlling them. And yes, they have to kind of do things and problem solve, but it's still very kind of helping them along the way, as opposed to having to do mathletics for school or learn their Chinese words online. So thinking about it in those different ways. And so I think, there absolutely is space for gaming, and it is a way that they connect and they go to school and they talk about it, but there absolutely has to be limits on gaming, and there has to be limits on gaming. Like, for example, I think there should be absolutely no screens or gaming before school. The kids, it wires up their brains. We're getting all this sensory stimulation. Most of our kids are then getting on a bus and they're getting all this sensory stimulation. They get off from the school bus. The schools are big, noisy, visually confusing places. They're getting extra stimulation. And then our teachers are the ones that are having to calm them down to sit and try and focus, right? So I don't think that's fair. And again, when just before bed is not when you want your children to be gaming. You don't want their brain to be going adrenaline, 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 bum, 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 which just wakes them up and puts it all through their body as well. That's the time we want calm. So I think there can be a time for gaming. But again, I would maybe put that in some of your family rules. So once you've done this, this, and this, you can have an hour of gaming, and I would limit it. So say, for example, you believe that it's okay for your children to have 2 hours of gaming a day. I think you need to break it up. I don't think 2 hours of sitting there gaming like this is appropriate. So maybe you get to do an hour when you get home from school, then you've got to go and do some physical activity or something, and then maybe at another time. And that's for you as parents and family to figure out.
Perfect. We have another question. Quite interactive. It's good. We've got another question from Rebecca Boss. I think this is her second question. Do you think, as parents with students online at home, we should be trying to make our children stand up for some of their students? I think she's trying to say if she's asking for standing desks. Because it says here, I'm pretty sure that that's what she means, because we should be trying to make our children stand up for some of their students. I think she means standing desks. I hope so, Rebecca. How do you think teachers would feel about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's absolutely fine. I think so too. I think also just build it in. So, for example, every time they have a math Zoom, they've got to be standing up. Every time they have to do their Chinese Zoom, they have to be standing up. So build that into your schedule and your day, because at school, they aren't sitting down in front of their desk or in front of the classrooms. You know, our school classrooms today are lovely and they're interactive, and the kids are doing movement breaks and they're moving around. And I think absolutely incorporate that, because that's going to help, again, with more of that physical activity, seeing we are very restricted with our movements at the moment. And our children are online a lot more. Standing desks are great. Just, you know, getting your computer and putting it up higher on a desk so the kids have to stand up. My daughter sits on a therapy ball for a lot of her lessons, which means she can move around and her body and her tummy muscles are getting tighter all the time. And that really helps her stay focused as well. And that's one of the biggest tricks that OTs always tell families, is always have a therapy ball in your house, because it's such a great way and that kids can sit down and work on all these different muscle groups while they're doing their online learning.
Fantastic. Great idea. That's just a big yoga ball, right?
Yeah.
So great questions, everyone. Keep them coming. We are now moving on to the second area of focus. For those who have just joined us, we're here today with Leith Stewart from Young Folk Therapy, and we are discussing how to minimize screen time for children. We're now going into our second area of focus. We first focused on the impact of too much screen time, and now we're focusing on how to implement rules and guidelines.
Yes.
So going on, first question, how to implement rules in the house, outside of the house, and play dates. We've kind of touched on this already. As you said, each household has their own rules, and I think that's a great rule to come by, that every week we shouldn't compare and contrast. But how to implement rules in the house, in your own house.
Yeah, so just like you implement other rules, you need to have hard and fast rules about screens and some boundaries around screens. So some of the rules that we have in our house, to help some of those parents who aren't quite sure maybe the way to go or how to implement them. So we have no screens before school ever. Okay, so, except I will slightly preface this, except for a Kindle. So my daughter's allowed to read her books, because she has a lot of her books on Kindle. So she's allowed to read her books, but there's no screens before.
No interactive screens.
No. I think there should be absolutely no screens on buses. I don't think need to be on their screens at buses. That includes listening to music or watching with friends or anything like that. I think it needs to be, like, especially for primary school. I think even for high school, I don't think we need to get their brains ready for learning, not this constant stimulation of stuff going through their heads. And
how about podcasts? I'm wondering. I know that a lot of older kids are getting into podcasts, 14, 15. Some kids listen to the news on their phone. Would you just recommend focus on the bus, focus on your surroundings, let that come in later?
Yeah, I love podcasts. I like them. My absolute favorite thing.
Me too.
Podcast. I love Audible books for kids.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Listened to Harry Potter not so long ago.
I'll touch. I'm going to touch on that in a minute, because I think that's something really important about our kids' listening skills and taking in and remembering information. But what I think why we need these hard and fast rules of no screen time is because we need our children to have time for passive thoughts and passive thinking, because that's when the ideas come. It's consolidate who they are as a person. It's when they're thinking about their own thoughts and putting them into little baskets about how do I react to this or do I not react to this, or mulling over something that your friend said to you yesterday, or rethinking about the fight you had with your girlfriend or your mum or your dad. Now, if our children are having constant sensory stimulation, they're not having a chance to really think about who they are as a person and what their reality is. Because I think if children spend too much time in a distorted reality or someone else's reality, they're not they're not becoming, or a distorted world, they're becoming confused with what they're personally thinking and what their personal ideas and values are, and we need to give them time to do that. And so that's why I really think we need to have hard and fast rules where there is no internal input, because I think also, like, the thing with, and we know the thing with podcasts and book recommendations, and when they're looking on YouTubes and videos, the algorithm, and even, you know, TikTok, the algorithms are so strong and they're so clever. They are feeding our children and us what we want to hear, what we want to be, what we want to see, without us actually being able to hold on a minute. Is that what I believe in?
Yeah.
And so
we put into our own echo chamber.
Absolutely. You know, as adults, we need to get away from this constant voice, and
Absolutely.
children do too. So I think, you know, no screens at all before school. I think no screens on the school bus.
Dinner time, I really like that one. No screen. I have that rule too. No screens at dinner time. You should interact during dinner.
Like, no screens at all during any meal. So no, like, if you're sitting at the table, even if your child is sitting at the table by themselves, which does happen in Hong Kong sometimes, or just in the world, at home for family dinners, there's no screen. Focus on the eating. Focus on focus just on the quiet of being in a space in your own head, because again, that's when we've got time to have that deep thinking and that metacognition and that layering down of understanding and memories without external noise and external traffic. So that's, I think, is a really good, I think they're two good rules, because I think just implementing those two rules actually really stretches the screen free time, right? I think things like, if you're in the elevator, no screens in the elevator. You do not need to pull out your screen and check your WhatsApp for the 5-second ride it takes to go up in the elevator. No screen in a taxi ride. You don't need to be sitting there scrolling in it. So just adding these things into their day is going to significantly decrease this passive screen time. Because let's face it, if they're in a taxi, they're just scrolling, or they're just WhatsApping, or or they might, you know, be WhatsApping and sending messages really, really quickly without really thinking it through, because I've got to get out at the next stop, etc. And so I think having some of these really hard and fast rules, like, we also have a rule that we absolutely have really let go since COVID, because we just don't have much to do. But we tend to do no screen Saturday. So we don't have any screens at the house until 6 p.m. on a Saturday. And that's for all of us.
That's intense.
Intense. Yeah. And times, weeks, did my head in, and it was really hard. And then after a while, it was lovely. Like, I felt like we all
it does feel great
on a holiday. And then, you know what, it was interesting as well, when we implemented that, my friends who I were meeting or having to do stuff with got a lot more organized, because I didn't get, sorry, running 10 minutes late, sorry. I knew I didn't have my screen. So it was a really nice, I think, like, calibration. But I know that can be quite extreme for some families and some people.
It's finding a balance.
Pardon?
It's finding a good balance for you.
Absolutely. And I think, so having some hard and fast rules, but then, you know, talking about boundaries. So we tend to try and do no screen Saturday. But the other day it was pouring with rain, we had nothing to do, and there's nothing open. So we watched a movie. So it was like, well, that was our boundary. It's not a rule. So let's move that to see what's going on with our family.
Of course. Yeah, you should be able to bend the rules, whatever works in your favor, of course.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Yeah.
I've got another question come in from Abigail Rath. What is your top tip for convincing a teenager to stop binge watching Netflix in their spare time? I think that's one for all of us.
I know, it's such a good idea. Yeah. Do you know what? I think it's really difficult in terms of, again, putting those boundaries or those tips in. But I think if your if you're giving your child a device and you're paying for the phone and you're paying for the data and you're paying for all of this sort of things, I think then you can put some restrictions on, and you can say to them, look, what do you think is an appropriate amount of time? Like if they've gone out and if they've exercised, if they've spoken to their friends and they want to sit and watch 2 hours of Netflix, I don't think that's a massive problem. If all they want to do is watch like 8 hours of Netflix, I think there's two things. I think you've got to maybe have a discussion with your child and talk about, like, why are you sitting here watching TV? Is there anything else you could be doing? Can we build something else into your day? Again, I think it is hard at the moment because all the activities have stopped for the kids. And like the big one of putting your kids in sport or art or some activity, or go for a hike or play the guitar, but you've got to build in ways that they have to do those things. And I think if you set limits, the kids do find things to do. And I think, you could have this really open discussion with them. Look, this is what I think is acceptable. This is what you think is acceptable. Perhaps we can monitor your screen time for the week. You show me what your screen time average is at 9 o'clock every night. And we're going to work on getting a time together that we think is an appropriate time that we can both work at. So if your teenager's showing you their screen time and it's 10 hours a day and you're looking at it, social networking and all the rest of it, I think you need to have a discussion about we need to rein that back, and we need to start monitoring this, because we absolutely, teenagers, there's two things here. We want to start giving them the tools to make decisions as adults, because that's what ultimately they're going to become. But we also know as teenagers, their brains are not fully developed until they're in their sort of mid-20s. That frontal cortex, they can't make great decisions. We have to be the decision makers for them. So we have to be the ones that say, this is not right for you. Just the same as we say, you can't drive a car, or I'm not going to give you a bottle of vodka at 15 to take to the party. We're not going to give this copious amount of screen times, because I'm the parent, and we are going to put some rules down.
Of course. Do you think that parents should reduce their own screen time? I know that you, for example, but you, for example, a lot of us work online, and a lot of us, we are forced with screens most in our line of work, especially now. Our kids are seeing the parents at home working in front of screens 8 hours a day maybe, and they might not know the difference. They might, I'm sure that depending on the kids' ages they will, but and the parents are just as much as the children addicted to their screens, from social media to the news, and of course it is our own decision how we use screen time, but kids are only seeing us on screens, whether it's for leisure time or whether it's for work or whether it's for reading the news or being up to date on a T9. How do we reduce our screen time in an effective way for our kids, to make an example for our kids?
Yeah, I think having, again, some family rules and guidelines. So no one brings screens to the dinner table, or in the hour before your child is going to bed, you consciously put your screen away and you turn it off. I also think I see parents all the time, a child will be wanting to come and talk to them or interacting, and they're on their watch or on their phone. And so I think being really aware of your own personal screen use. Hold on. Now, hold on. Like
absolutely.
This. And being really definitive. So saying, okay, so Mummy's got to do a Zoom call, and then I've got to do emails, then I will talk to you. So saying what you're doing on screen. I'm doing a Zoom, and then I'm doing emails for work. Then I'm going to put it down, and then we have time for you to tell me about what you want to do. So I think really defining what you're doing on screen with them during this time when they're seeing you on screens, or or if you're reading, if you're reading the news, or if you're reading a book, say, oh, I'm actually just reading my book. I will finish my chapter and then I'll go and talk to you. Because I think kids like to wait. That you don't have to put your life on hold because they want to. But just conceptualize for
Explain
them
it. Yeah.
what you're doing and be really conscious of your screen behavior in front of them. You know, like we would never interrupt a conversation to, you know, look at our phone or answer our phone, you know, back in the day. But people just find that normal today, and we find it acceptable. You'll be out to lunch or dinner with someone or a friend, and they'll be like, "Oh, hold on for a second." It's like, since when did that
used to be normal?
When did that become acceptable? Like, let's have some boundaries about what we think is, and is it really, really important? Is it really important that you know when your Lululemon order is getting delivered to track it, or is it because you're waiting to see what time your friends dropping your child home? So really put those things in context.
Prioritize.
Yeah, I think having to that set times in the day to really decrease your screen time, and also not sitting there, you know, scrolling while you're watching TV or having multiple things open, because that's just showing, you know, you can't be what you can't see. Now, if your children can't see you off screens, how do they know that that's the right way to be? So I think modeling those behaviors, but also explaining, I've got this to do. This is why I've got to finish this report. I'm looking at this, and blah, 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 blah. But, you know, as adults as well, we're allowed our own downtime on screens. If you want to game for 2 hours, you can go and do that. If I want to look on Instagram, I can do that as well. But just, I think you've got to have that balance and then expect that maybe that's going to come back as well.
Which brings me on to the next questions about consistency. Consistency is always key in everything, but especially now with pandemics, typhoons, weather changes, it's hard to stay consistent in 2020. And how do you stay consistent? And is it very important to even be consistent in this, or should you just continue to have the conversation with your children?
So I think, because right now our world is just constantly changing, we can't plan anything. We can't plan a week in advance.
Yeah.
And we know that children and adults feel safe and secure with routines and boundaries. And that's what decreases anxiety and depression. When we have things during our day that we know is going to happen, regardless of what's happening in our world. So I think it's time for greater consistency, because if your children are waking up and do not know, if we don't know when they're going back to school, we don't know if the beaches are going to be open on the weekend, we don't know if we can go get a coffee as a family together in 2 weeks. We do not know this. But if you can put guidelines in place in your home that create some boundaries and safety, that's going to help them. That's going to help them with the anxiety, which is happening. It's absolutely happening around the world for kids and teens with all this COVID and not being seeing their friends and this constant change. So we need to create better and safer environments. And at the moment, because all we can do is control what goes on in our homes, we need to keep those consistent and routined and as safe for our kids and for our families as possible.
Of course. No, I do think, especially like as you said, during a time where planning is almost impossible, consistency does lower the anxiety. So perhaps now is the time even more so to be consistent.
Yeah, I think so.
We've got another question coming in, which is great. I'm loving all these questions. Let me just find it. We've got another one from Matt Lee, I believe. Yes, for older children, I recommend. No, sorry. Moving down. Let's see. Yes, for older children, I recommend that they charge their devices outside of the bedroom, maybe on the bed. Is that a good one, to not let them charge in their phones or away from them?
Yeah, I think it's great, because I think, we're such creatures of habit, and we're all thinking that little bit of dopamine, that little bit of serotonin hit of, oh, what's going on my phone? Is someone texting me? Is someone sending me something funny? Has something happened? And so, you know, we look at our phone and it's this like little magical box of complete possibilities of what's inside. But if you take your phone away or you hide it or you can't see it, I definitely think it diminishes that need to see what it is. So, you know, if you're going to the shops, leave your phone at home. If you know, spend some time completely disengaged from your phone or hiding it so you can't see it, so you can't get onto it. So I think, you know, having some of those behaviors, I think that also really kind of focuses in on safe behaviors online, which is kind of another huge big topic. But in terms of charging your phones, I think that's great. You know, I know some families have a box and they all have to put their phone in the box from 7 till 8 to charge, so no one's on it, which I think is a great idea. Or, you know, that hour and a half before bedtime when you don't want the kids like interacting too much, putting it in this box to charge so then you can see it. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I agree with that. Even for myself and for adults too. Just if you don't see it, then it's always better.
Yeah.
So going on to the next one. For those who have just joined us, we are discussing minimizing screen time with Lee Stewart from Young Folk. I forgot your
Young Folk Therapy.
Sorry, there you go. We're here to discuss how to minimize screen time, and we're discussing how to implement rules and guidelines. We've had a lot of discussion on Facebook. I'm loving all the interaction. Please keep them coming with the question. We're getting towards the end, but I just wanted to ask a few more questions. What is appropriate screen time? Because we've touched upon this again, but now with homeschooling being so prevalent, does educational screen time count? Should we say that homeschooling is now also screen time, or?
I don't think we can.
Yeah, I know, but
yeah, I think it's a great question. I don't think we can. I think that right now, any screen time that is their online learning just has to be put in that this is school. This is not screen time.
Yeah.
So you just lump that away. Put that in the box, and I don't, because there's nothing that we can do about that. And of course, we're desperate for our kids to get back to face. This is the next thing. They have to be online to be learning at the moment. You know, I think that's
it's the best way. Same as mom and dad have to work at home. You now have to work at home too.
Yeah. What I think is important though, I think during the breaks. Yeah. During their school, but depending on how your school organizes the day. So my daughter's day is a little bit different, but she'll like have a 20-minute break, then a 30-minute, then maybe an hour, and then 20. So in those those small breaks, we don't let her use screens.
What's a good one?
So we just stop it there. Because at school, when they're having morning tea or their snack time, they're not on screens. They're racing around playing with their friends.
No, let's see. And especially schools here in Hong Kong, they look fantastic. There's so much interactivity at the schools. They wouldn't even want to be on their screen, I don't think.
Do you know what, though? I will add, I think it's okay right now to, say, for example, they want to FaceTime a friend or FaceTime their grandparents and have actual face-to-face conversation, not gaming, not texting. So if they're like, oh, can I FaceTime Nikki because I just really want to talk to her. My daughter's into hamsters at the moment. All she wants is a hamster. And all she do is Zoom her friend who has a hamster so she can see the hamster. And I think that's okay because
that's a healthy conversation because we are missing social interaction right now.
Yeah. And we still have to we're having conversation. I'm listening to what you're saying and then I'm waiting and it's coming back around and I have to think of something and we're making eye contact as opposed to kind of like just texting all these different ways. I kind of think I think we need to sort of put that into that's social and playing. But then I think at the end of the day, absolutely, if they've done their work and they've been great, if they want to go and play Fortnite for an hour, if they want to go and, I don't know, do whatever, you know, as a family you allow them to, they want to go play Zelda on Nintendo Switch or whatever, that's okay. So I would count that as the screen time. I'm not counting school as a screen time.
Okay.
Right now. Even though it does have this impact on their eyes and their body.
Yes, that's the thing. Yeah, you gotta. It's
right.
Different situation.
We've got to give everyone a break, and we have to stay sane ourselves. Like, let's face it, parents,
absolutely.
we've got to get our work done. And so, I think it's just about that balance. And I think as OTs, we're really good at putting things into functional ways. Like, that's what we do. How's this functional? What can we do to make this more functional? What's functional for your family? What's functional for my child? Looking at it functionally, how's that going to work with my child, with me, this, putting it all together to make sure that we can all get through this time happy and potentially unscathed, I think.
No, absolutely. Yeah, tricky times, and I think as time passes, it will only get trickier because we will be forced to be more on our screens more than ever, and hopefully, because as you said, I was quite troubled by how many physical problems that could arise with being on too much screen. And I think that's for all of us. So it is very hard to, I guess that's, as you said, consistency is key now and trying to get consistent. So would you recommend minimizing the usual screen time a child gets now that there is homeschooling, or would that not be fair?
Well, again, it depends on what you as a family think is appropriate. I think what you've got to really do is categorize the screen time.
Yes.
That's what's causing the issue.
Yes.
Right. That's what's causing these mood disorders and this anxiety and this lack of concentration and the physical implications and the eyesight. It's the type of screens and what they're doing on the screens is the issue, not 100% necessarily just being on a screen. And so I think looking at what your child is doing on that screen and talking to them about those behaviours and why maybe that's not so good, and this is why we're not letting you text late at night to the teenagers, because their emotional brain takes over and they might text something really horrible and rude that they forget the next day. This is why we don't want you screens late at night. But you can watch, Selling Sunset on Netflix or whatever you're into at the moment. So I kind of think, like, functionally, what is going to be the right choice for my child, and I'm going to put that into play.
Fantastic. Yeah, that makes sense. We've touched upon this a little bit in our first section, but just to kind of reassess, when do you think it's a good time to discuss the dangers of too much screen time? We've discussed that as a young child, these are the rules and that's just how it is. But when do you think it's appropriate time to discuss, as we've discussed before, physical and mental dangers of screen time, and how do you approach such a conversation?
So do you know what? I talk to kids probably from about year 3 onward about not necessarily the dangers of screen.
For the international viewers, what age is that?
Oh, okay. So maybe around about 7 and 8 years old.
Yeah.
7 or 8. So during the kids who come to our OT session, quite often we start off with some physical activities because we're trying to, improve those skills. And we might do a hamstring stretch or a thoracic back stretch. And I'll say, we are doing this, and because at the moment everyone's doing lots of sitting, and when you do lots of sitting, your back gets really sore and it's not as strong. And so this is why we're doing this. And so I talk to them about, as we're doing the activity, relating it back to screens. Or if they're, some kid comes in and is just going, Fortnite, dance. Or if I'm asking them to do a writing activity and all they're doing is writing about this battle and this battle and this battle, or I'll say, look, I need you to think about something else. I know that's really important for you, but I think maybe you're watching too much of this because you don't have any other ideas in your head. And this is what happens. If you're only doing one type of screen or one type of game, it's really hard for you to think in other ways. I always talk to kids about no screens before sleep.
Yeah.
like 7 or 8 years old, because I say it stimulates your brain, it makes your brain wake up, and we want your brain to be quiet and still, because that's how you're going to remember all the things you need to remember. That's how you're going to lay down those pathways. So I think talking to them from, again, when you think it's okay to give them screens and be on these games, you've got to start talking to them about the implications of why you don't want them on the screens all the time, or what, doing this is fine, but also we've got to counteract that with this as well. And how, I think that's really important, because if you start opening that conversation when they're young, as they get older and older, and it's much more complicated with cyberbullying, and they look at porn sites and they look at inappropriate content, you've already started that conversation. You've already started the conversation about screens, and what you're going to do is you're just going to keep building on this conversation. So it's going to be a really natural part of your dialogue as a parent, that you can pull these extra things in as and when they occur. And we know that they do. We know that it's a big issue with these teenagers, with all this other, the content that they're accessing, and even the content that some of our younger kids are accessing through YouTube and through TikTok that's not appropriate. We need to have that conversation, that they come to you and say, this is what happened, I don't understand that. Then you have to be able to be comfortable in saying, well, if I let them go on TikTok, I've got to be responsible for talking to them about what they're seeing on TikTok.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely have to take that responsibility, and making sure that we need to really understand the social media and the influences our children are accessing, because we want to guide them through the content. We want to understand the content so we can have a really good informed discussion with them, so they don't rebel and, have all these issues, or have all these, I know some kids have like the special locks so that their parents can't get in. They hide things. They have double accounts and all the rest of it. We want to keep that open, because we know it's a really, really, really dangerous world, the internet.
No, absolutely. You want to keep that conversation going. You want it to be open. You want to be in your child's life, especially in the technology side, because it is even for us as adults, it can be confusing and terrifying, full of fake news and conspiracy theories. So yes, we definitely need to be careful, especially for the young ones.
And I think, but we also want to tell them what a great tool it is.
Yes, absolutely. It is.
All stuck in our respective countries, and we can have a face-to-face contact with our families. Like that's what's getting most of us through this whole COVID thing.
Absolutely.
We're WhatsApping our friends and saying, hey, this sucks, but this is funny, and we're sending funny things through. So there's great things about being really, really connected as well. And so we've got to say, this is what's so great about it. This is what's not so great about it, and let's work together so we can constantly have this happy medium.
Indeed. I want to thank you, Lee Stewart. This is the end of our interview. Let me know if I've missed anything, if you want to add anything. I feel like we've covered all of the bases, and I think this has been a very interesting topic and a very useful topic right now for parents and adults, even without kids as well, for everyone, how to minimize our screen time today. Thank you again. All your details, every details of Young Folk Therapy and Lee Stewart will be on the link of the live session. We will also be pushing this on YouTube. We will be sharing this with you as well, Lee. Before I go, I just want to invite our next thing. We are doing a Singapore Virtual School Fair 2020 on September 1st. You can meet all of Singapore's top schools from your couch. The invitation will also be in the link description below. Lee, thank you again for today, and thank you for coming in.
No problem.
And I wish you a good day. Thanks everyone for joining us.